This decision is setting off alarms across the ATP, and the timing makes it impossible to ignore. With the Australian Open approaching fast, Carlos Alcaraz has ended his working relationship with Juan Ferrero, the coach who shaped his entire professional rise. No injury crisis. No collapse in form. No public conflict. Just a sudden split at the very top of the sport. Inside the tour, the question is simple and uncomfortable. Why change everything now? The separation was confirmed days ago, and on the surface, the tone was calm and respectful. Thank you messages. Words like gratitude and pride. But in elite tennis, timing is never neutral. Ending a 7-year partnership weeks before the season starts is not a routine adjustment. It's a structural move with real consequences, and people inside the circuit understand that immediately. According to Spanish national media, this split was not emotional or impulsive. It came after differences during contract negotiations that were meant to define the next phase of Alcaraz's career. That detail matters more than any farewell message. Contract talks at this level are not about money alone. They define control, over scheduling, over physical load, over preseason priorities, and over long-term planning. When those talks stall, it usually means the vision for the future is no longer aligned. Alcaraz finishes the year as world number 1. 8 titles this season. 24 trophies in total. 6 Grand Slams already. These numbers change everything around a player. At this stage, the margin for error disappears. Every decision is magnified. Every loss becomes a storyline. Every physical issue raises questions. And every voice inside the team matters more than ever. Juan Ferrero was not just a coach. He was the architect of Alcaraz's development. He committed to him in 2018, when Carlos was just 15. He walked away from established players to build a project from the ground up. Under Ferrero, Alcaraz didn't just win. He evolved into a complete player across all surfaces. He became the youngest world number 1 in history and held that position for 50 weeks. That level of continuity is rare in modern tennis. But long partnerships face pressure when a player reaches global dominance. The dynamic changes. Decisions stop being purely technical. Commercial obligations grow. Exhibition matches increase. Travel demands rise. The calendar becomes crowded, especially in the preseason. And this is where quiet tension often builds, even when results remain strong. Over the past seasons, there has been growing discussion around Alcaraz's preseason choices, particularly his participation in high-profile exhibitions before the Australian Open. Multiple voices in the tennis world have questioned whether those commitments affect his readiness for Melbourne. Alcaraz has never produced his strongest version in Australia. That is a fact, not an opinion. And it's impossible to separate that pattern from how his early season is structured. Ferrero, known for discipline and long-term planning, has never hidden his focus on preparation and physical protection. When contract negotiations begin under those circumstances, they are not just formalities. They are moments where authority is defined. Who decides the calendar? Who sets limits? Who says no when opportunities conflict with performance goals? Ferrero's own words after the split are telling. He stated that he would have liked to continue. That single sentence carries weight. It suggests this was not a sporting decision driven by dissatisfaction with results. It suggests a difference in direction. Alcaraz, on the other hand, emphasized ending the cycle from the top, framing the separation as a strategic close rather than a breakdown. That framing matters. Ending a partnership while winning sends a message. Change is being made to protect or reshape the future, not to fix the past. But that doesn't make it safe. History shows that altering a stable structure at the peak can either unlock a new level or introduce instability that takes months to correct. The immediate impact is clear. Preseason planning changes. Leadership inside the team shifts. Communication lines adjust. Even if the technical work continues smoothly, decision-making pressure increases. The Australian Open does not wait for transitions. Djokovic, Sinner, and others enter the season with defined teams and established routines. Any uncertainty, even small, becomes a competitive disadvantage at that level. Inside the ATP, this move is being watched closely not because of drama, but because of risk. Alcaraz is no longer just a prodigy. He is the reference point of the tour. His choices influence expectations, rivals, and narratives. Splitting with the coach who built him at this exact moment is a calculated decision, whether it was intended to be or not. And the consequences of that decision will not appear in a press release. They will appear under pressure, match by match, starting in Australia. If you want real analysis of what's happening behind the ATP headlines, subscribe to World News Tennis. What makes this situation more delicate is that the split doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens at a moment when Carlos Alcaraz's career is entering a different phase, one where raw talent is no longer the main variable. At the top of the ATP, the margins are defined by planning, recovery, and decision-making under pressure. That is why this separation is being read inside the tour as a strategic fracture, not an emotional one. Ferrero's role over the years went far beyond technique. He was the stabilizing force during Alcaraz's physical transformation, helping him add power without losing movement. He was also the voice that pushed for patience when expectations exploded after early Grand Slam success. That balance is harder to maintain once a player becomes the face of the sport. The demands change. The environment changes. And often, the center of gravity inside the team shifts closer to the player himself. One of the clearest pressure points has been scheduling. Alcaraz's recent preseasons have included exhibition matches and promotional appearances that bring visibility and revenue, but also add travel, matches, and physical stress at the worst possible time of the year. The Australian Open requires specific preparation, long matches in extreme heat, 5-set endurance, a calendar that punishes even small physical miscalculations. This is where criticism began to surface, not from outsiders, but from respected figures inside tennis. Analysts pointed out that Alcaraz has yet to show his highest level in Melbourne. Losses there have come with visible physical drops and lapses in rhythm. That pattern raised questions about whether the early season was being optimized for performance or stretched by external commitments. Ferrero has always been known as a coach who prioritizes structure and restraint. His own career was shaped by discipline and timing. When discussions about future contracts take place under these conditions, they inevitably touch on control. Not control of the past, but control of decisions going forward. Who decides how much is too much? Who draws the line when opportunities conflict with preparation? The fact that Ferrero publicly expressed a desire to continue suggests that the break was not about trust or belief in Alcaraz's ability. It suggests a difference in how the next phase should be managed. And at world number one level, those differences don't stay theoretical. They affect training blocks, tournament choices, and even recovery protocols. The immediate replacement also tells part of the story. Samuel Lopez is not an outsider brought in to reset everything. He is a long-time presence in the team, someone who has worked alongside Ferrero at key events, including Grand Slams and Masters tournaments. On paper, this looks like continuity. In reality, leadership dynamics change the moment one voice becomes final. Lopez has already been the acting lead coach at times, including during Ferrero's absence at major events. Results during those periods were strong. Finals were reached. Titles were won. That will be used internally as evidence that the transition can work. But those moments happened within a shared structure, not after a formal split. The psychological weight of sole responsibility is different. There is also the family element. Alcaraz's inner circle has become more involved as his profile has grown. His older brother has taken on a larger role within the team. This kind of internal consolidation is common at the top level, but it also reduces external checks. Coaches like Ferrero often serve as a counterbalance, especially when pressure rises and expectations become relentless. From a competitive standpoint, the timing remains the biggest concern. The Australian Open is not a tournament where teams can experiment. Djokovic builds his entire season around peaking there. Sinner arrives with stability and momentum after consistent hard-court success. Zverev continues to refine his physical base with a long-term approach. Alcaraz enters this environment with a leadership shift and unresolved questions about early season preparation. None of this guarantees negative outcomes. Alcaraz is still one of the most complete players on the tour. His ability to adapt during matches remains unmatched for his age. But elite tennis punishes small inefficiencies. A slightly altered preseason can mean arriving in Melbourne 5% underprepared. At this level, that 5% is the difference between lifting a trophy and exiting in the quarterfinals. Inside the ATP, this move is being interpreted as a sign that Alcaraz's camp is asserting greater autonomy. That can be empowering, but it also transfers responsibility. If the season starts slowly, the spotlight will not be on Ferrero anymore. It will be on the new structure, the new decisions, and the timing of this break. What happens next will not be judged by words or statements. It will be judged by how Alcaraz looks physically in the opening rounds, how he manages long matches, and how his team responds under stress. The split may have closed a chapter, but it has also opened a far more demanding one, with no grace period and no buffer. And as the tour prepares for Melbourne, one thing is clear. This decision has raised the stakes, not lowered them. As the tour looks ahead to the start of the season, the focus is shifting from why the split happened to what it changes on the court. At this level, coaching decisions don't stay abstract. They show up in patterns, in match preparation, in tactical adjustments, and in how a player manages pressure when momentum turns. That is where the real test of this move will begin. Alcaraz's game has always been built on controlled aggression, heavy forehand pace, constant variation, and a willingness to move forward. Ferrero played a key role in shaping that balance, especially on hard courts, where patience is often more valuable than creativity. The concern now is not whether Alcaraz can execute his game, but whether the strategic guardrails that shaped it remain as firm under a new leadership structure. One area under close watch is physical management. Alcaraz's explosive style puts constant stress on his body. Over the past seasons, he has dealt with muscle issues and fatigue at critical moments. None of these were catastrophic, but together they highlight how thin the margin is. Ferrero was deeply involved in moderating training intensity and match load. With a leadership change, even small shifts in training philosophy can accumulate quickly. This becomes especially relevant on hard courts. The Australian Open demands durability more than brilliance. Matches stretch deep into 5 sets. Recovery windows are short. Heat and humidity punish hesitation. Players who arrive slightly overworked often look sharp in early rounds, only to fade later. This is where preseason decisions become visible, and where the absence of a long-standing authority figure can matter. Strategically, the ATP landscape around Alcaraz is also evolving. Jannik Sinner has become more consistent, especially on faster surfaces. Djokovic remains the benchmark in Melbourne, with a system refined over a decade. Zverev continues to build physical resilience and has reduced volatility in his game. These players are not standing still. They are refining, not rebuilding. Alcaraz, by contrast, is adjusting structure while defending his position. That is inherently harder. Every opponent studies his patterns more closely. Every early round wobble becomes amplified. The pressure of being world number 1 changes how matches feel. Ferrero's experience as a former top player helped buffer that pressure. He understood when to intervene and when to let Alcaraz solve problems on his own. Now, those decisions fall more heavily on the new setup. Samuel Lopez is highly respected and technically sound, but stepping fully into the lead role shifts expectations. Communication becomes more direct. Responsibility becomes more visible. And during matches, especially in tense moments, the clarity of that leadership will be tested. Another factor is external noise. The split itself creates narrative pressure. Media focus intensifies. Every training clip is analyzed. Every quote is read for hidden meaning. That environment can be distracting, especially early in the season. Ferrero's presence often acted as a shield, deflecting attention away from Alcaraz. Without that buffer, the player may carry more of the spotlight himself. From a mental standpoint, transitions can be subtle but impactful. Trust takes time to recalibrate. Routines change. Feedback feels different. Even when the coach is familiar, the hierarchy shift alters how decisions are received. In tight matches, that can influence shot selection and risk tolerance. The ATP has seen similar moments before. Players who reached the top early and then adjusted their teams faced periods of recalibration. Some emerged stronger. Others lost momentum before stabilizing. The difference was rarely talent. It was timing and coherence. Alcaraz's camp appears confident that continuity will outweigh disruption. The technical base remains. The training environment stays familiar. But the absence of Ferrero's long-term authority removes a layer of institutional memory. That doesn't disappear overnight, but it does change how quickly the team can respond to adversity. As the season opens, attention will turn to details. How sharp is Alcaraz in extended rallies? How does he manage physical stress in back-to-back matches? Does he arrive in Melbourne with clear tactical discipline or visible adjustments mid-match? These are the indicators that will reveal whether the split was clean or costly. For now, the decision stands as a calculated risk. Not reckless, but exposed. The tour is unforgiving to uncertainty, especially at the top. And while Alcaraz remains one of the most dangerous players in the world, the structure around him is under its first real test. The next weeks will not just define his results. They will define whether this transition strengthens his control over his career or introduces instability at the worst possible moment. As the season is about to begin, the real weight of this decision is no longer theoretical. It's practical. It's immediate. And it will be judged in the most demanding environment the ATP offers. The Australian Open does not forgive uncertainty, and it does not allow time to settle into new dynamics. For Carlos Alcaraz, this is where the split with Juan Ferrero becomes fully exposed. The first thing that will be tested is clarity. At the top of men's tennis, players don't lose because they forget how to hit the ball. They lose because decisions under pressure become slower or less precise. Shot selection, match tempo, risk management. These are not instinctive at this level. They are reinforced daily by structure, repetition, and authority inside the team. When that authority changes, even slightly, it can affect how a player responds when momentum shifts. Ferrero's influence was strongest in moments of instability. When Alcaraz rushed. When he overplayed. When emotion threatened to take over strategy. That stabilizing presence was built over years of shared experience, not weeks or months. Removing it does not automatically weaken Alcaraz, but it does remove a reference point that had proven reliable in critical moments. Now, responsibility consolidates around the player and the new lead coach. Samuel Lopez inherits not just tactical duties, but the burden of expectation. Every decision will be evaluated through the lens of this split. If Alcaraz starts slowly, questions will follow. If he looks physically stretched, attention will return to preseason choices. If he exits early, the timing of the separation will be questioned openly. This is the cost of change at the top. When you alter a winning structure, you also absorb full accountability for what comes next. There is no longer a shared narrative of growth. There is only outcome. From a broader ATP perspective, this move also reshapes how Alcaraz is perceived by rivals. Djokovic has always thrived on stability and routine. Sinner's rise has been built on incremental refinement, not disruption. Zverev's return to form came after re-establishing trust in his physical and coaching base. Alcaraz is now the outlier, the player adjusting structure while defending the #1 ranking. That does not mean failure is likely, but it does mean pressure is unavoidable. Every opponent will test him physically. They will extend rallies. They will target endurance. They will look for hesitation. This is how the tour responds when it senses transition. The most telling sign will not be wins or losses in isolation. It will be how Alcaraz looks over time. Does he maintain intensity deep into matches? Does he manage energy across rounds? Does he adapt tactically without visible confusion? These are the indicators that separate a clean evolution from a destabilizing break. The emotional framing of the farewell was respectful, even warm. But elite tennis is not guided by sentiment. It is guided by margins. And the margin for error as world #1 is smaller than at any other point in a career. Ending a 7-year partnership weeks before the season begins is not neutral. It is a high-stakes bet on control, autonomy, and timing. In the coming weeks, the narrative will shift from explanation to evaluation. There will be no patience window, no adjustment period granted by the tour. Alcaraz will be measured against his own standard, and against rivals who arrive with no internal changes and no unresolved questions. This split may ultimately empower him, or it may expose how much stability mattered. The answer will arrive quickly, under heat, under pressure, and under expectation. And once the season starts, there will be no way to separate the decision from the results that follow. If you want real analysis of what's happening behind the ATP headlines, subscribe to World News Tennis.